Well, thank you all so much for attending. I'm so excited to have you. I'm Matt Vanidley, the founder and CEO of Sema. We're a software company obsessed with code quality and have a free code review tool. But the love of code reviews came first. And so just couldn't be more excited to talk, share some ideas, and save some time for you guys, for you all to weigh in as well. I promise I will talk for no more than 18 minutes to 50 past. But I can see comments on the right-hand side, and I would be delighted to be interrupted as we go. So if you have ideas, comments, observations, I really encourage you to share as well. So we're going to talk about code reviews. I have 5 topics. Why they're important, number 1. Number 2, how I would explain their importance to a non-technical audience, like a CEO or finance. Number 3, best practices on giving code reviews. Number 4, best practices on receiving them. And finally, best practices for the team as a whole. Obviously, one of the core theses here, if we're talking about how the non-technical audiences as well, is a code review is not just a code author, the code, and the reviewer. It's the context of what's going on in that team, in that system, in the whole organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So first, why are code reviews important? You're all here. You took time out of your day, so I know you already believe it. But if I really simplified it, code reviews are important for the quality of the code, for engineers, and for the craft itself. So for the code, of course, it's one of the best possible ways, along with built-in linters and other sort of tooling, and QA, of course, to make the quality of the code as high as possible. It is an unbelievable mentorship opportunity for engineers, not only to receive reviews, but also to give them. Because, of course, when we are teaching, we actually have to know it well enough to explain it to someone else. And that's a magical moment for teaching ourselves as well. And then finally, talking about the craft, code reviews is important for the craft of code. I think we have an obligation to give back to the code, to give back to the community of coding, given how much code is done for individuals, for organizations, for users. And so making code as good as it can be within the confines of organizational limits and financial obligations, it's the right thing to do to make code better for its own sake. And code reviews have an important part to play. So that's part 1. Part 2, how would I explain to a non-technical executive the importance of code reviews? Full disclosure, I don't actually think most non-technical CEOs would ever, or sales or finance, would ask specifically about code reviews in particular. I think this is about all of the steps that we take to improve the quality of the code. But you never know. Someday someone might ask about an investment in code reviews in particular. I would say 3 things. If someone said, make the case for me for why we should be doing code reviews and more broadly investing in code quality. First, you'll lose developers if you don't. In 2022, with work from anywhere being fully embedded almost everywhere, maybe except Apple, but even then, folks have options. If you don't set up an environment that is conducive to engineers, they will find a place that is conducive. And of course, that means things like where engineers can work from, but also includes the working environment. Does it take 2 weeks to set up, to push your first make your first commit? Is there not a sufficient investment in learning? It's probably one of the top reasons. And so code quality and code reviews in particular are a great way to invest in your engineers. Second, if you don't do code reviews, you're going to ramp up and take them seriously. You're going to ramp up new engineers more slowly, whether they're new to the organization or new to coding or third-party development shop that you're working with. It's just such a faster way to transfer knowledge that you miss out on the ramp up, on a faster ramp up if you're not doing it well. And third, code reviews might slow things down in an individual pull request, but absolutely contribute to faster velocity down the road. Again, I'm certain everyone on this call agrees with this, but if you don't take the basic, at least the basic steps of investing in maintaining or improving code quality, it's just going to bite you later. It's just going to bite you later. That was part 2. Part 3, and again, I'll encourage you, feel free to jump in into the chat. Thank you, Darren. So 3, some tips for giving code reviews. There are 5 I would suggest. Number 1, remember it's a human being on the other end of the line. It is very easy. There's some huge benefits from working from anywhere. One of the downsides is it can be hard to remember to speak with folks as if they were in front of us. And especially in moments that are heated or when someone feels very passionately about the answer, about the potential right answer, to remember, let me just read it out loud. And if this person were sitting here in front of me, would I say that to this person's face? If you wouldn't say it, you shouldn't write it. So kindness is a big part of effective code reviews. Second, if you're going to criticize in code reviews, which of course has its place, number 2 is not to just say fix it without giving more guidance. So just saying fix it's not right is it's really difficult to accept. Now you might say I've never heard of that ever, which hopefully is true, and if so, good. But there's a couple flavors of that I certainly have encountered, including I'm going to make a commitment to this open source community, and the pull request is rejected because it does not meet all of the standards for submitting a pull request, without specifying which one. And so if you're going to give the criticism or improvement, make sure it is easy for the code author to understand it and to go find it and fix. Third, it's about assuming good intent. And I think the clearest way to carry this out is to err on the side of asking questions. Instead of, I think you should do it X instead of Y, instead consider, tell me why you chose Y instead of X. Help me understand. If the person's super junior and you already know the answer, don't make them guess. It's okay to say, you know what, just do it this way. But if you're in some way not sure, starting with curiosity, coming from a place of curiosity, is a really nice way to potentially learn for yourself and for it to be easier to hear. Fourth is clarifying the level of importance and the action necessary. So are you saying this code is good and ready for production? Are you saying something needs to be fixed before it's ready? Something is optional to be fixed? So we all know what a nit is, or we've certainly heard the word nit. Different organizations use it differently. Is a nit a small change that is not required to be changed, to be improved before the code is ready for production? Or do nits have to be fixed as well? So even a simple thing like that, it's complicated to communicate between humans. And so being clear on bottom line, what are you telling the author to do, is really important. And then finally, fifth, code review feedback includes praise. And we're all very busy. Saying LGTM and just moving on to the next review or the next piece of code it's very common, of course. But pointing out when the code is not just good, but really good, elegant, particularly maintainable, a teaching moment, really sharing positive feedback, and especially positive feedback when it's warranted, and not just fixing or passing it on. It's a really special opportunity to say thank you to your colleagues. That was part 3. Thank you, Darren, for sharing notes as we go. So now part 4, some tips on on being a code author, receiving code reviews. 4 tips here. 1, keep pull requests short. Rule of thumb is you should submit pull requests that only need 1 to 3 comments. That way, it's just human nature. If you give someone a book to edit or to review, they might say, "Oh, it looks good." Whereas if you give them a sentence to review, they'll be able to take it. They're more likely to dive in and dig into it. Of course, there are exceptions. Sometimes there's large pull requests, but in general, if you can create the pull request so it only needs a few comments, that's the optimal length to get good feedback. Number two, you got to do your best to be open to the feedback. And so if you've worked really hard on something and someone criticizes it and you can feel your frustration or anger or exasperation, whenever possible, I encourage you to sleep on that feeling, sleep on any of those negative feelings, walk it off, do something else, come back later, because it is, when we communicate with negative emotion, it's kind of the only thing that people can hear. They're not listening to the content. They're just watching anger, frustration, whatever. It's visible in what we type and what we look like on Zoom and so forth. Third, responding to the feedback as fast as possible is a really good idea. We all know how important being able to be focused is. The opposite of being able to be focused is context switching, having to think about one thing and then another thing. The faster you can respond and deal with a code review, the less context switching there's going to be, and the less gap for having to think about it again for the code reviewer. So turning it around quickly is really important. And then finally, if there is going to be a back and forth between the code reviewer and the author, I highly recommend switching from asynchronous discussion, which is what would happen in comments back and forth, and switching to a synchronous method like a huddle in Slack or a meeting or talking in the same room if you're in the same room. And that's really about cutting down on context switching. If pull request is submitted, reviewer responds, commenter responds, reviewer responds, there's 5 moments where people have to think about it again, 5 moments total, and you don't want to get to 6 or 7 or 8. So if you find yourself going back and forth, hop on a call, hop on a huddle, whatever the method is, and talk it out. Finally, the fifth part of this, what are good practices across the team, whether it's an open source community, open source project supported by a community, or a private organization? What are some of the tips that a team can follow to make the entire code review process more successful? First and foremost, frankly, is psychological safety. You've probably all heard about this. It's the idea that, can you feel comfortable in a team telling the truth, especially when the truth is unpleasant? Will someone have your back, or will you be attacked for sharing it? Doesn't give you license to be a jerk, but does. Organizations that have psychological safety are able to take more risks, and have better conversations and just feel better. And not only feel better, but actually perform better. Google commissioned a study on its highest performing engineering teams and found that high psychological safety is one of the highest indicators of success. Second is having a clear process for code reviews. It can be so obvious. Oh yeah, someone's going to look at it. We'll put it on the. We'll say the code review is done. Someone pick it up. But I'd really encourage anyone who's in charge of a team to make sure it's posted somewhere and to have those rules actually be followed. And if they're not followed, update either the training so people follow them or the documentation so that it's really clear what the team is doing together. Third is the whole process should go fast. I recommend certainly that code reviews should take priority. Code reviews and responding to code reviews should take priority over coding, so that whenever there's an opportunity to do a code review or deal with a code review or code reviews should come first. The idea is if something needs a code review or a code review is underway, that person is blocked from going on and working on the next and working on the next thing until the code is complete, because they might at some point have to come back and fix it, in the middle of the code review process. And just like in general, strong engineering teams are continuously finding ways to get rid of blockers, and that's, I think, the best way to think about velocity anyway, or velocity improvements. Reducing the amount of time that people are blocked by waiting to finish their code is a great thing. So emphasizing completing code reviews quickly is really important. Fourth is having stage specific. Someone went off of mute. Darren, do you know if I can mute other people? Oh, thank you very much. Fourth is having a stage specific approach to code reviews. So what do I mean? I run a code quality company, so obviously I'm super obsessed with code quality, but still you always have to make the trade-off. Any organization has to make the trade-off between the innate quality of the code and its ability to meet organizational needs, business needs, financial needs, user needs, whatever. Because beautiful, extremely clean, low technical debt code, if it's not actually solving an organizational issue, is not of use. There's lots of ways you can think about, for your own sake, how you make that trade-off. But for me, the serving the external goal, whether it's users or meeting company deadlines or whatever, is the price we have to pay for the privilege to work with code. But also at that level, how good the code can be is going to vary based on the let's call it the maturity, or at least the age of that code base and the stage of the company or organization. At the extreme level, if you think about a hackathon, almost any hackathon should not have code reviews, because the whole point is to just code as fast as you can and see what you can come up with. On the other extreme end, a mature, high-stakes product, let's say in financial services, might have 4, 5, 10 reviews before it makes it to production. So there's a spectrum. Just how robust is that code review process? There isn't one right answer in all situations. So finding the right investment in code reviews as a method for code quality is appropriate based on your stage of the product in the company or organization, just like other investments in code quality. Fifth, I really recommend not only codifying the code review standards, but also coding standards. And I personally, over the last few years, have gotten more and more convinced that folks should lint from the beginning. So have the linter rules built in and not leave that discretion to individuals, even for small teams. I've changed my mind on this. And the reason is it is a little bit constraining, it's true, but it lets people focus the coding and focus the code reviews on the hard part, the stuff that require the most judgment and skill. Semicolons versus commas, the frequent example, it's just not a good use of our time to think about those conversations. And then finally, organizations should prioritize and emphasize and celebrate code reviews along with other parts of the code quality process, just like they would feature releases. I think about this a lot, and in my experience and talking with thousands of engineers, it's pretty common for the organization to celebrate the result, feature release, meta deadline, etc. And it's much more rare to celebrate the inner workings, the process that made that all possible. And code reviews are an essential part of that process. So finding ways, especially for leaders, to call out the benefits of code reviews, to call out people for doing code reviews is really valuable. As promised, I said I would stop talking and then take questions. So thank you all so much for listening. I'll start at the beginning, and then feel free to please add comments add questions to the chat. So Riaz, keeping pull requests short when using a feature branching strategy might be difficult, especially when the feature is a bit complex. You're absolutely right. There are many exceptions for when pull requests are going to be longer, and therefore the code review is going to be more intense. What I'd say is if a team is following that approach for most or all of its pull requests, then I would expect the team will have to work a little bit harder to make sure that time is set aside and code reviews are prioritized. If it's something you can do fitting in between tasks because it's a small PR, it might organically happen that the code reviews happen quickly enough. But in a situation, for example, feature branching, it might be a good idea to set aside time where absolutely serious code reviews are happening. Maybe it's the first thing in the day or something like that when you're fresh. Jill, especially when the product manager writes up a complex feature, I'm sure you were responding to one of these, and I'll say I agree. I very strongly agree. If you'd like to add more, I would be happy to respond to it. Do commit messages help a bigger pull request in a code review? I would say, I'm trying to think of an exception. In general, the more explanation in human sentences or phrases you can give, the easier it is to communicate, and therefore the easier it is for people to collaborate. So I'd say yes. Anytime you are writing explanation, anytime you're writing human language, whether it is as opposed to software language, whether it's comments in the code, whether it's comments in when you're creating the pull request, even if it's outside of that and just an explanation, the more documentation you can have about the code that's clearly written and up to date, the better. But Mariana, I would ask, that's sort of my general answer, but I always like going to the data on these questions and otherwise. I would encourage you or your team to experiment. Well, first to just discuss, maybe look at some sample code reviews you've done recently and talk about what went well and what went less well. We actually ran a code review retrospective to talk about learning from code reviews. I'll post it if anyone wants to see it. But basically, reflect on your previous practice as a team and see what you can learn from it. Fennel asks, is code review part of agile activity? I do not consider myself an agile expert, to be totally honest with you, and I am very impressed with the many different definitions of agile. So I will defer to experts. Maybe I'll go look it up actually, and I'll respond to this. If there's a formal answer. I cheat a little bit as my answer is, are code reviews a good idea? And are we using sprints? We are using sprints, so we're basically agile, and code reviews are a good idea in almost all circumstances. That's my very glib answer, but I'll look it up and I'll reply. AJ, this is a very good question. When there's an argument between a contributor and a reviewer, especially if two sides both have strong opinions, what should we do to resolve the conflict and make the final decision? I love that question so much. The only thing I can say is it really depends. And I think I think if you're one of those people who has the strong opinion, the two things I would recommend are doing your absolute best to understand the other person's point of view, and just permeating empathy. Let me make absolute sure I understand why this person thinks their point of view is better. Second, I have three things actually. Make sure you understand the other person's point of view completely. Second, try to establish what would happen if. So let's say that, let's say we pick your way instead of my way. What do we expect? What kind of outcomes could we predict will happen from this if we followed your approach? Let's compare them to the outcomes I think will happen. And then third, no matter what, reflect on it later. The two of you agree to come back later and see if the outcome you predicted happened or not. I studied a bit of negotiation earlier in my career, and one of the terms I love and I come back to is multi-round negotiation, which is to say, in life, almost everything is a multi-round negotiation. It is very rare that you're only going to have one discussion, argue over the size of the pie, whatever, and never talk to each other again, especially in code reviews and in teams. You're going to have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of interactions. And in my mind, in almost any situation, figuring out a way to hear and to understand each other and understand the consequences or potential consequences and be able to reflect on it later, to have a retrospective, which also I think is part of Agile, that's more important than any given situation. There was one. Let's see if I lost it. If I'm using test-driven development strategy for my code, do I still need to code review? I say, so yes, is the short answer. A slightly more nuanced answer is it depends on the stage of the company and how much capacity there is. But what I actually think TDD, which is a very good idea as long as you're past the basic level of product market fit, just makes code reviews even easier because the reviewer can understand what you're trying to do. It makes it, I agree, it makes it less absolutely necessary, but the combination of the two is even better for the code, and I believe ultimately better for velocity. So I would do both. Jill, it can be difficult to control the length of the pull request. Absolutely. Some product managers write features that are actually multi-part, specifically tickets that follow as a user I want to. Exactly. I admit I have done that a few times in my career. So if the pull request reflects a very complicated ticket, product ticket, that's of course understandable. And I guess I'd say the bigger the pull request, the more that the author needs to give warning and notice to the code reviewer. It is just more work, and it's going to take more mental energy. And so having someone, we all know this, if someone's going to take more mental energy, you need to give them more of a heads up. You need to make sure they are able to protect their time to help. It's just a little bit harder to carry it out. By the way, of course, product managers should, I hope in most situations, even if a product manager gives a giant story, it doesn't follow that the engineers have to complete it in one pull request. I very much hope so. We're almost at the hour. I will keep going, but let me just say thank you to everyone who has a hard stop. This was super fun. Really, really good questions, and I wish you massive success in your professional and personal quests. But I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. Junda or Hunda, apologies if I didn't pronounce that right. How much time should an engineer allocate to giving a review? So does it differ between a senior and a junior? So I love that second question. I love it when teams have junior engineers give code reviews. I absolutely love it. It is not a given for some obvious reasons that junior engineers may not have as much expertise as seniors. So if you're in a situation, but giving a code review is such an amazing opportunity to learn that I think very highly of organizations who've made the investment in their juniors to have them do code reviews. And so if you're a junior, probably the first thing I would do is ask for advice because there's so much nuance and context. How good should my code review be? Hopefully an organization can hear that question in the right way and not think that you're slacking, but just asking for a prioritization. saying how good does this need to be is definitely a part of our culture. So I hope that's okay. Um, I think the generic answer is as much time as it takes to understand the issue and reflect on it and write up a clear and understandable reply. And if you're not sure it's clear and understandable, read it out loud. As folks junior across their careers, not just developers, everybody starting out, we sometimes learn in university to use big words and fancy sentences because it makes us sound smarter. We think it makes us sound smarter. The opposite is true. The simpler and clearer your sentences, the easier, the wiser you sound. And so, especially for juniors, this is a statement about human writing. Could be code reviews, could be other things as well. Try to make it as clear as possible and as if you were actually saying it. That's a huge part of it. That's sort of maybe the detailed answer. Big picture answer, it is rare in my experience for a team to spend more than 20% of their time on code reviews. So if you find yourself spending more than 20% of your day on code reviews, that's probably on the high end, and I would check in to make sure you're spending it the right way. Reza, apologies if I didn't say it right. One, when I say pull requests are a good place to do knowledge transfer of the architectural system design. I wonder if that's a good question. One of the reasons I like code reviews is that they are a place for knowledge transfer in general. It is the most valuable thing about software companies or software teams is the knowledge of coders. It's not the code is written, it is what's in people's heads. And one of the huge advantages of code reviews is it's an opportunity for knowledge transfer every day. And so any area of the code, certainly the most important areas of the code, code reviews make sure that there's multiple people who understand it. It's safer for the organization to boot. I don't think that code reviews are an alternative to other ways of like big knowledge transfer, like architecture and system design. And I would say they're a supplement to really good diagrams, really clear documentation that's kept up to date, discussions, because just by querying it, having the conversation, folks can understand the architecture much better than they can just by reading it. So I'd say it's an addition. Question 2. On occasion, leadership attempts to come up with standards ad hoc in a pull request, which causes the author to be blocked. How do I recommend dealing with such a situation? So if I understand it right, someone in charge, let's say a manager, says, I'm rejecting this code review, this pull request because I've come up with a new reason. What should you do in that situation? My biggest suggestion is to be really empathetic. And your job in that moment is just to be a scholar of the situation. Hey, boss. Hey, manager, whatever. Help me understand what you were thinking. I thought we were following a different approach, or I had a different set of standards. But it looks here that you're sort of suggesting a new rule. Is this or approach? Is this temporary? Is this permanent? Should we be following this in the future? The trick, and it's really hard, is you can't say this when you're mad. Because if you're actually frustrated, even though you're trying to ask a question and trying to say the right thing, again, the negative energy comes across. So I would not respond in anger. Reflect on it, sleep on it, go do something else, and come back, and have that person teach you. Get yourself in a mind where you want to learn why that person made that decision in that moment. I think that's the best course. Mariana asked, if a bug goes into production, is it the responsibility of the code reviewer as well? I'm going to say yes, of course it is. But more broadly, code quality is a function of all of engineering, and QA and product and engineer and finance and sales and the CEO and everybody. There's a series, like code doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a part of a system and an organism that makes trade-offs about decisions. So we've all got put bugs into production because product wanted something rushed out the door, or the CEO said, I want this feature, no questions asked. So it happens as part of this system. I don't think the amount of bugs that should make it to production is zero, maybe with some few exceptions on some really high stakes code. But we should learn from those moments every time to see how we can make it less likely in the future. We talked about retrospectives. I think it's one of the most powerful tools when combined with psychological safety to just blamelessly understand, hey, a bug came through. How did it happen? How did we get here? What can we do differently in the future? And again, not in the moment when you're stressed, but later to reflect on it and wonder how did the system lead to this? Errol, you studied law. It's true, I did. Do I see some parallels between plug and play nature of software modules and amendments of the Constitution? That is an incredibly good question. I am definitely not a constitutional law theorist, but I'm going to have to think about this. Plug and play amendments. My extremely unstructured response is I think that the U.S. Constitution, the relationship between the core Constitution and the amendments are not especially plug and play, much less so than third-party modules. Part of that is a function of the ecosystem. Third-party code is in like 96% of all code, and there's 2, 3, 20 modules that you can use to solve a particular problem. And so in code, I think it is much more plug and play. Obviously, the Constitution wasn't particularly created that way, although I'm sure they were looking at other examples. But I think the amendments and the Constitution itself are much more interwoven. Don't ask me to repeat that. That's really off the cuff. So, okay, how can we have rules? Let's do this last one, and I'll let you all go. You've been wonderful. How can we have rules for code reviews if every feature and situation are so different? I find it very difficult to find patterns that apply to all cases and build a code review guide. That is a brilliant question. Thank you so much. I really, really like it. It is likely there are always basic principles that can be codified. At its most, at the most extreme level, maybe the code review guide is in every situation, there should be a negotiation between the code author and the code reviewer to decide how detailed the code review should be. Let me answer this, Darren. Best way to connect and follow up. Find me on Twitter. I'm findable. You find me through Codementor. You can find me. Happy to answer any more questions you like. Thank you. And again, thank you, Darren, for putting this all together. So, Mariana, at the most extreme version, it could be literally every time we're going to make it up. A slightly more structured way could be in almost every situation. Oh, thank you, Julia. In most situations, we're going to have one code reviewer, and in the following examples, we're going to have two code reviewers. And if you're not sure, ask. Similarly, like I said earlier, I'm really a fan of putting in lynching rules that are automatically detected, but also written down somewhere so someone can look at them. And so we can say, these are our coding standards and we're going to follow these. And then after that, once you get down, I don't know, the easy ones, because these are also very hard, I think the best standards are about trade-offs. And it isn't possible to prescribe every different situation, but you give overall guidance to help people make decisions. But also my philosophy about values and why values are so important to a team and an organization. So I'll give you an example. At Sema, our company, 2 of our 5 values are scrappiness, which means balance how good it is, with how fast you get it done, and excellence, which means get it done as well as possible. Scrappiness and excellence are intention in literally everything we do, across every department, across every decision. There isn't a right answer, because exactly as you said, it varies. It is but what you can do is give people the tools to have the conversation. In this situation, following the value of scrappiness, I think we should not fix semicolons versus tabs, because we need to get this feature out the door. Well, I think on the spirit of excellence, it's really going to be hard to maintain the code later, and so therefore I think we should fix it. That's, again, an extreme example. That's why I think we should lint. But there should be some way to document at least some of the broader agreements in most cases. Okay, I promise this is the last one. Christian, how to enforce engaging juniors to adopt a standard for code documents when they don't care about ... care about something. Let's see. Probably my 2 rules of thumb, maybe a couple rules of thumb for dealing with junior employees, not just junior coders, is make sure you invest the time in explaining why they should do things. And even if you really know it and you've gone through it 1,000 times, helping them explain why it's important to do it a certain way and not just that they should do it makes it more likely that they're going to carry it out because they remember it. Second, being a good role model for following the right behavior. So make sure that the seniors are doing it the right way and using them as role models. And third, I'm not above a little, you could say bribery, let's call it recognition. If there's a group of juniors and some of them are following the right practices and some of them are not, celebrate the ones who are doing a good job. Just praise will work to start. Maybe you run a little competition and thank people for it. You want to be careful you're not over gamifying. But just starting by thanking the people doing it the right way and thanking them publicly can be enough of a message to nudge people in the right direction. Amazing. This was so fun. I hope you found it useful. I'm so honored you spent a little bit of your day and evening with me. Please feel free to follow up. Wish you all the best, and thanks again to Codementor. Really, really fun. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.